Hey, it's Soul with another video, brought to you in part by Underwood. It's not home unless it's built by Underwood. As we inch closer to the Battle for Azeroth expansion, the dialogue has swung wide open on the different features coming. Some of them are super exciting, some of them are super not. But hey, we all have our opinions, right? Today I want to talk about a feature that is unlikely to reappear, and that is Reforging. Some players want it back so badly, while others are glad that an awful system like that is gone. It was around for 2 expansions, and it's been gone for 2 expansions, so are we in a better place than where we were before? We're going to explore the brief history, the arguments, and a possible solution that'll make everyone feel both happy and unhappy, because that, friends, is compromise. Anyway, what is, or what was, Reforging? Reforging is a system introduced in the Cataclysm expansion and lasted until the beginning of the Warlords of Draenor expansion. Reforging is a process where you, the player, can take gear with secondary stats and transform a portion of that stat into something else that currently isn't there, preferably something you like. So let's say you have this piece of armor with haste on it, but haste sucks for you, okay? Reforging lets you take some of that haste and turn it into crit, which is a much better stat for you. And you can do this for all of your gear, as long as it had a secondary stat to mess with. Here's something important to point out too. While Reforging was available for players, so were additional secondary stats, namely hit and expertise. There were even more stats, including spirit, dodge, and parry, but we'll use hit and expertise in most of my examples. In a nutshell, these 2 stats let you make sure that you can hit your target 100% of the time. Hit and expertise had breakpoints, that is, upper limits that if you exceeded them, you would get no benefit out of it. Obviously, there's no difference between hitting a target 100% of the time versus 110% of the time, unless Blizzard made excess hit and expertise into a thing, but they did not. So Reforging's primary purpose was to manipulate hit and expertise in case we had too much or too little of it, or to shave off healing or tanking stats that had no use for DPS specs that just happened to have that gear. Beyond that, it gave players the opportunity to optimize their secondary stats so they can get more throughput from the characters. This system made gear a little bit more malleable, that is to say, a piece of gear might not seem so great at face value, but with a bit of reforging here and there and everywhere, then it could be reasonably useful. To this day, a number of players argue for a return of the system, and they just haven't shut up, to say it so bluntly. In a world of sims and leaderboards, Raider IO, and Titan Forging, it sounds enticing to have Reforging come back, so players can optimize their characters as opposed to being stuck with that thing with versatility on it. So why did it go away in the Warlords of Draenor expansion? Obviously, it was because the garrison was a much better alternative. Just kidding. Reforging went away for a number of reasons that Blizzard explained, and I'll paraphrase, so strap in, I'm gonna get kind of long-winded here. One was that Reforging was part of a top-heavy customization system that also included gems, enchants, and little item-level upgrades that you could apply with other old PvE currencies. On paper, this sounded cool. It felt very role-play-ish to take this new shiny that you got and make it your own with your own little enhancements. Funny thing though is that the process was just fast enough that you felt compelled to immediately head back to town to kind of redress yourself with your new gear factored in. This is a practice that existed before and after Reforging, but back then, it got to be pretty obnoxious. Imagine a progression raid night, okay, when a few pieces of gear would drop for your team, and as a raider or a raid leader, you would feel compelled to stop the whole raid so you and the team can get their gear re-optimized. At best, you would have most of the materials on you to make the process as painless as possible. But most of the time, you'd have to head back to town to get the gems and enchants, upgrade their gear, and reforge the secondaries on possibly all their gear so they could have the minimum amount of hit and expertise while optimizing their stats elsewhere. Yeah. Add-ons simplified this process, making it easy for players to hit a few target stats with the push of a button. And the massive community was able to easily calculate and update these targets to make sure that characters were best optimized with the gear that they had. It helped create a culture where players were pressured to be optimized or be bad. It's one thing to feel empowered to customize your character, but there's a line to cross when it becomes a chore, and Blizzard seems to think that this was the line. In many raiding circles, there's a pretty strict mindset to follow what the pros do, to go with the most used specs among the best players in the world. Often we would read from pros and their websites that we need this much haste or crit or mastery rating to hit a certain milestone, and that'll make our class and spec not even good, but they just define it as viable. It's a very interesting back and forth between wanting the freedom to customize and alter stats versus optimizing according to what a person or a website or an add-on tells us. It makes you wonder if the choice to customize really is a choice at all. Anyway, going through this process of optimizing gear took up playtime and gold. It's not like there wasn't a return on the investment of optimizing your gear, but as the goblins say, time is money. And it got a little obnoxious when a single gear upgrade would result in reforging and enchanting and gemming and upgrading almost every time. Blizzard seemed to be tired of having their players be stuck in what they thought was a bloated meta rather than the game itself, so a lot of things changed in Warlords of Draenor. To summarize that single point, Reforging was just one casualty in a big itemization revamp that gives us the fewer options we have today. Another, maybe more pragmatic reason was that the primary purpose of Reforging was going away. One of the other casualties of Warlords of Draenor was the removal of the tanking, healing, hit, and expertise stats. Like I said earlier, having an excess of hit or expertise literally served no purpose except for maybe specs that dual-wielded weapons. Gear with dodge, parry, or spirit on it was pretty discouraging on a DPS spec character because at best a player could dampen the pain of having those stats. Starting in Warlords of Draenor came a stat called Versatility that served two purposes: increased throughput and decreased damage taken. There was another stat, Multi-Strike, that was only present for that expansion, so I'm not going to bring that up. Frankly speaking, Versatility is a pretty boring stat, and a lot of people agree. Versatility just doesn't mesh well with most specs because it doesn't influence things like proc rates or cooldowns, and some players would love to have Reforging to take some of that versatility and move it elsewhere. This is backed up with all sorts of arguments, both the reasoned and the hyperbole. Versatility literally does nothing for my class.
Versatility sucks, give me a more fun stat.
Versatility is why I'm never gonna bear children.
And that sort of thing. These critics equated versatility with the previously abandoned stats as stats with no value, when actually versatility was just the least attractive stat for their given spec. Their argument kind of falls apart when you look at the simple math and see that 1 point of versatility does something, while 1 point of excess hit or expertise does literally nothing. Effectively, Blizzard solved the problem of having gear that was potentially useless. They created other problems for themselves over the years, but with hit and expertise and the other stats gone, the purpose of reforging those stats off went with it. Uh-oh, incoming opinion, so feel free to discuss this with me, but I mostly agree with Blizzard's changes that, by the time of Mists of Pandaria, the optimization of items has just gone too far. It was just too cumbersome to go back to town and do maintenance every time an upgrade dropped. It knocks off the excitement of getting a new awesome drop, knowing that it's not going to be usable until it's run through the washer, so to speak. But hold on to that comment that I know you're going to type. A very valid argument can be made that Titan Forging also makes drops not feel special until it's like
Mega Titan Forged with a socket, an avoidance, and a sandwich.
I don't want this sort of system either, but that's a conversation for another day. This is the Reforging video, okay? Many would argue that features like the Netherlight Crucible introduced in patch 7.3 were a step in the wrong direction. Because when a relic upgrade dropped, once again, players had to go back to their ship and look at their relic and send their upgrades and so on and so forth. We critics felt pretty darn smart for pointing out the hypocrisy. At least though this only applied to the 3 relic slots in our artifact weapons and not nearly every slot in our character's inventory. So it wasn't so bad. This tells me that, in Blizzard's eyes, this level of break-in routine is acceptable. 3 slots to manage is better than 14. Which makes me wonder if Reforging could come back, but in a more reasonable form. I'm no designer, but if I can bring back Reforging, here's how I would do it. Let's keep in mind what's going through Blizzard's collective head when it comes to Reforging and customization overall in WoW. One is that they want to minimize the breaks in routine, like in the middle of a raid when new upgrades are dropped. Ideally, you get something new, you should just be able to put it on right away. They appreciate a balance between moments of excitement like that and control over our character's stats. And this is me adding in my little twist to involve the player economy wherever it's possible and reasonable. Alright, so here's my idea. Let's bring back Reforging, but limit it to ring slots. Like, wow, yeah, didn't quite blow your mind there, did I? But I don't think it's a bad idea at all. This makes for a balanced situation where players have control over the biggest source of secondary stats, their rings. Reforging will still have a reasonable impact on throughput, but will only come into play with these 2 equipment slots, so the pressure of guesswork isn't constantly on the player's mind. To eliminate even more of the guesswork, let's not let rings Titan Forge at all either, just like weapons won't in Battle for Azeroth. To add a little twist into things, Reforging items will be made available and spread among the various professions, which, according to early reports, was something on the table but was scrapped before Cataclysm's launch and the live iteration of Reforging that we had. I wasn't able to find any additional information on this, but I think it might have been because there were many more secondaries than there are now, 4 versus 8, and because Reforging back then involved every item slot. That would make for 64 different kinds of Reforging items you'd have to shuffle around in your inventories. Imagine that sort of management. Actually don't, it just sucks. Taking a look at today's secondaries like Versatility, Crit Strike, Mastery, and Haste, that makes for only 12 new items that crafters can make to allow the reforging of ring stats. Much more reasonable. This shifts the economics of reforging from sinking gold into some nameless NPC to another way to participate in the economy. This is just one idea though that hopes to be a compromise between the wants of some players and Blizzard's efforts to give some control without overwhelming them too much. In World of Warcraft's next expansion, Battle for Azeroth, customization and optimization will reach a new level of complexity and depth, and this isn't just a buzz phrase I'm using. Let's break it down a bit and keep in mind that optimization is for advanced players looking to squeeze out that extra few percent. Anyone who doesn't have the time or the inclination to grind for gear shouldn't have to worry too much about optimizing their characters unless they really love the feeling of being under social pressure. So there's item level, also known as primary stats. This is influenced for the most part by completing more difficult content or presumably the rare Warforged or Titanforged drop. There's the balancing of secondary stats, which can be supplemented by the occasional gem slot, enchants in the ring, neck and back slots, and maybe, just maybe, reforging the rings too. There's Azerite gear, special gear in the helmet, shoulder, and chest slots that supplements character abilities. There are trinkets for big stat increases or special effects and procs. There are talents that provide choices to help tailor your character for a given situation. I don't think this whole setup is perfect by any imagined metric. There could be more to do to add some fun into our characters through some polishing of our stats or abilities. Now might be a good time to maybe reintroduce Reforging if it makes sense, but I'd love to see some discussion in the comments. I hope you enjoyed watching. If so, please support the channel by liking this video and subscribing for more of this and all things Warcraft. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, stay safe, stay happy, and stay breezy.